Ooh. We cannot play with ideology, dudes.
I sit there and I hear these people, it's like it's a competition of who's more Muslim than you.
You really want to be behind that and not express yourself and good question. Be free.
The hijab is the biggest cliche of Islam.
I don't know if any of you have picked up on this yet, but I'm gay.
It is something discouraged and not welcome.
Islam requires you to critically analyse the teachings and the book.
Suicide bombing is never allowed in Islam.
I could not leave my house without getting abused.
So are you going to make a prayer for me to go to heaven?
I remember the exact morning of 9/11.
I am a Nazi, mate. I was born here.
I'm Aboriginal and Muslim. Are you going to kick me out of my own country?
This is the face of Australian Muslim youth.
I haven't given you the right to decide what I am.
But I can call out your bull just very easily.
I don't know cooking.
That's okay, we got women here.
You are just treating me like I'm covered from top to toe. I have right to say.
Yeah, you do
I
have the right to say, but you don't have the right to disrespect, and that's what I'm sensing.
So, Lutfullah, in light of the SBS show, Muslims Like Us, how did you feel about it?
I actually just saw last night first episode and a bit of the second episode. I found it really interesting. And yeah, what do you think of it?
I thought it was really interesting too, but what intrigued me more was to kind of probably like assess what would inspire SBS to do the show Muslims Like Us. Do you think it was a show that kind of relates to the current time and the social climate of today?
Absolutely, because I think there's a little of ambiguity amongst the general population as to what is Islam, what are Muslims, and how do they live, what do they do. Because often we look at specific communities, and when we're asked, is this Islam? And we'll say, no, that's not Islam, that's not true Islam, this is true Islam. And then you look at the other side and they say, no, that's not true Islam, this is true Islam. So there's a lot of confusion and ambiguity in the populations. So I think that was one of the things the show aimed to do through SBS, to take out ordinary Muslims and let them present themselves.
Right. Yeah, no, I think narrative, like, obviously when it comes to anything Muslim or Islam related, it is going to be politicized, right? So I think narrative is so important for communities to describe themselves and define themselves, because often it's kind of done for us. Obviously, none of us were on the show personally, but these are everyday Australian Muslims as well. So perhaps to some extent we could relate to the, areas of contention that arose in the show, and how that kind of, perhaps we could like analyze, well, how do we relate to that? How do we respond to that? So are there any aspects of the show that you found to be kind of intriguing, or any things that came up, arguments and whatnot?
I think just the cast to begin with, I think it was not a perfect snapshot of the Muslim society. For example, we had four that, for example, drank. Yeah. And I don't think 50% of Muslims in Australia drink. So I think that was like a little bit aspect where it was not randomly selected. Yeah. I think they went to the show thinking we want different characters. We want someone with a niqab, for example. We want someone who is not straight. We want someone who...
I can show the mosaic of the Muslim community in itself.
Yeah, right. So, but because it's not random, therefore it's, in a way, it's selected. And it's not a true representation of the society.
That's actually really on point.
So that's one of the things I found really interesting. Yeah. And of course, I understand what they do it. If they had 8 guys who all thought hijab was essential and none of them drank and had no disagreements, then they will kill the point.
No, that's actually a really, really interesting point. An area that I found myself to be really, really intrigued by was, when the girl wrote, there's 1.6 billion ways to be a Muslim. And the Niqabi lady, in response to that, said, but there's only really ideologically one concept of Islam. And I found that to be really interesting, because a lot of the times you hear people define Islam or define Muslim in only one dimension. And for her to say there's 1.6 billion ways to be a Muslim, rather than say there's 1.6 billion types of Islam, I thought that was really excellent of her to do so, because in essentially what we're experiencing as young Muslims in this current, cultural climate is that as a community, we kind of have to accept the diversity within our community without thinking that is an expense on our own faith. So to have tolerance for diversity that is, empirical.
Yeah, I'm a little pedantic when they say it's 1.6 billion ways of being Muslim. I want the definition of what you mean by ways of being Muslim.
Right.
I like hot chili, my sister likes sweet chili.
Right.
Is that different ways of being Muslims? And what do you mean by Muslim?
Right.
Because what you've done by saying 1.6 billion Muslims is you've differentiated, created a subgroup between that 1.6 billion and the rest of the human population.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is, how did you select who is within that 1.6 billion? There must be some factor, some unifying factor that's common amongst the 1.6 billion.
Which is, of course,
Muslims.
the faith in itself.
But then, let's say Islam is the unifying factor. But then who defines Islam?
Right.
And if we define it ourselves, then you could have 1.6 different Muslims, yes, but then Islam does not mean anything. Because it's up to interpretation of every single individual.
But doesn't that like presuppose, doesn't that assume that by the point that you raised, that Islam needs to be essentialized within the individual itself? In the sense that, like what you just said, there's 1.6 billion ways to be a Muslim. And essentially what she's trying to say is, because there's 1.6 billion Muslims in the world, that means that Islam is practiced differently for all 1.6 billion. But that does not necessarily mean that those 1.6 billion view themselves as defining a complete different kind of Islam to the other, even though we practice our individuality differently. So I think there could be some criticism of that statement in itself, because once again, if everyone can define something, then that something is really just a reflection of one's own definition. It doesn't have its own integral, essence. Yeah. So I think that was really interesting.
Because there has to be some core elements, like
of course. And that's why I also agreed with the niqab, I forgot her name, the niqab lady, I don't know, something like that, when she said, the ideology is essentially the core thing, but then there's diversity within that. But once again, I'm not a theologian, so I don't really know the aspects of that within itself. So for you personally, as a young Australian Muslim man, do you feel as if you're a part of a vibrant Muslim community, or do you just feel as if you're one of that 1.6 billion and one of the 22 million Australians that just happens to be a Muslim?
I think I'm one of the 1.6 billion Muslims. Mm-hmm. I try to be as open-minded and as critical of my beliefs as I can. Mm-hmm. So if there's a scholar I listen to, or if there's a book I read, I do not take anything for granted. Mm-hmm. I like to apply critical thinking to everything I understand. And as a result, some of the views I have may not be orthodox. Mm-hmm. So there are obviously aspects within the religion that's up to interpretation that gets a little bit of malleable. They could go one way or the other way and still be accepted, but still be within the realms. But in the other aspects where you cannot argue, there's no room for argument. You can't come and say, I believe in 4 gods. Of course. Yet I'm a Muslim.
Of course.
That's like.
Which was interesting when the girl with the pink hair, oh my god, I'm terrible with names, when she said, that her idea of praying is far more holistic, in the sense that she can just pray in a car, whereas, if you want to talk technically, that there's no room for that kind of holistic approach to prayer. So I find that to be kind of interesting. Do you think, oh my god, I'm interviewing you. do you think, because oftentimes our space, like where we occupy, tends to influence how we define ourselves. So as a Muslim in Australia, where Islam, the Muslim community, is heavily politicized, would you say you define yourself more, whether it's consciously or subconsciously, by your Islamic character, as opposed to, say, if you were to go back home to a predominantly Muslim country, would you feel as if that Muslim character is as politicized, or would you view yourself to be like more of an individual? Only because, like, for example, with me, when I went back to Africa, I was like, oh, okay, I'm an Australian. Whereas here, I'm like, okay, I'm Somali, because that's the area where you're different,
Yeah, I agree. As a Muslim here, obviously I consciously feel that I'm a Muslim. I'm slightly different to the guy next to me in many of the activities we do, many of the views we hold. That's natural. If you're out of place, or if you're slightly different to the person next to you, you feel the differentiating factor come out a little bit more. But just back to the point of liberal views on religion.
What do you mean, liberal views?
As opposed to? It's all inclusive. Okay. Any view you have, you could say you're a Muslim, irrespective of whether that's actually the predominant view or not. For example, the one...
Is that a liberal view or just a non-critical view though?
I guess...
Only because, like, when I think of liberal or liberalism, it does place emphasis on the individual, but that's still constrained by societal acceptance of norms and values, etc. But anyways,
but we're in a current that for example, the way people see religion is constantly changing, and with all the political,
like a less conservative view.
Yes. What's your views on the? Well, I can't remember his name either. How he came out to be gay, and saying that he has no issue with that, or he's saying that's perfectly allowed in Islam. What were your views?
Well, I kind of peeped it from the get-go. He didn't have to come out to me, but I thought that was really interesting because on the hot topic of, you know, homosexuality, it's really a hot topic regardless of what religious background you come from, or even non-religious. Some people just have a very conservative traditional view on things like marriage or sexuality, even from a non-religious background. So it's not true that religion informs all of morality. But my view on that was, first of all, as a gay person, I think he's, you know, entitled to all human and civil rights as everybody else. But as far as him subscribing Islam with homosexuality, I thought that was a bit of a stretch, because obviously we know that homosexuality is not condoned in Islam, but that's the sexuality, but he's still a person. So my question would be, well, how do you think, only because I think with all the crises that's occurring, I think the positive unintended consequence is that it kind of forces us as Muslims in this contemporary era to actually really revisit the doctrine Islam itself and really assess, well, how do we justify, or how do we organize our society around Islamic values, as well as being in association with what we know of human rights, which is not mutually exclusive from Islam in itself.
Yeah. First of all, we have to say, like, I empathize and sympathize with all the characters in the show. They've all had their own experiences, their own troubles, their own lives, and they've reached their conclusions based on their experiences. And it's not fair for me to judge them based on my experiences. But just to your point where you said Islam does not condone homosexuality. They will argue that it does. So we need to come up with a method of deciding whether it does it or does it not.
Well, this is where the diversity of just thought, and I don't think you have to be a scholar to have an opinion. So, you know, one group would say, and I agree, Islam does not condone homosexuality. And the other group would say, well, not only does it not condone it, but it orders that we, you know, death penalty for it or whatever. So then there's this grey area where I think this is where I'm at, where it's like, okay, we can not condone the act, but do we criminalize the person per se? And that's what I meant about liberalism and the rights of the individual. And I think this is really important because, you know, the personal does get political, and when you're a Muslim, the political does become personal because the two is like so entrenched within each other. So where I'm trying to go with this is, okay, so it's not condoned, but we don't really want to enforce a death penalty upon anyone. So what are the lines we draw? Like, let's just say theoretically we're in this, you know, ideal Muslim world. What are the lines we draw between the public and the private? You know what I mean? Because so much of Islamic character is based upon wanting the private to be just as moral Islamically as the public, and the public to be legitimate, etc., etc. Well, where do we draw the line between private and public?
That's a good question. But I think we're slightly climbing different mountains over here.
Right, it's such an interesting point.
Yeah, because I was looking more from the Islamic position itself. I think there's no doubt with what Islam's position is, where we've had 1,400 years of scholarship, of generation after generation of scholars from different races, from different cultures, from different backgrounds, coming and studying, spending decades studying the book and the Quran, that is, and coming to the conclusion that homosexuality is not allowed in Islam. And then,
well, what are the implications of that?
What are the implications of that? First of all,
is it a theoretical disagreement?
I have no problem with someone saying homosexuality. I believe homosexuality is allowed in Islam.
Okay.
That's fine. That's your personal view. You could be right, you could be wrong. No, that doesn't have much of an implication. But when you say Islam allows it, then you're not saying it's
you're taking authority that doesn't belong to you.
Yes, you're taking, and I think that's not correct.
Right.
So I could do whatever I want and say I believe Islam allows that, and people could say, no, you're wrong, that's your view. But the time I say, the instance I say, no, this is Islam's position, where I'm representing Islam with no authority. And that's
so same thing as people that say, well, you know, I guess it's to substitute for whether it's inadequacy or whether it's guilt or shame. I guess it's to substitute for a guilty conscience. And I don't mean this specific individual here, because I hear people say, oh, well, you know, there's so much lack of women's rights in Muslim majority countries. Yeah, well, there's lack of women's rights in most of the world. But that means that Islam allows women to lead prayer or, you know, alcohol. No, it's not. Like, you know, this is your individual thing. There's many things I do individually that I know Islam doesn't permit, listen to music or whatever, but I don't really subscribe that being a part of Islam. I think that's an authority that no individual really has a right to do, you know?
Absolutely. And then the judgment,
it complicates it a lot more. I think we're a bit fortunate living in a liberal society. We're comfortable with the idea that people can have disagreements and yet still be protected by the law as individuals, etc. Just like how many people might not want Muslims to be in Australia, but no one's really going to trample upon our constitutional and citizenship rights when it comes to, you know, exercising our freedom of thought, freedom of religious expression and whatnot. But what I heard him say, my perception of what he said was that he thinks he can still be, okay, let's not make it about him, but the overall concept was one could still be a good Muslim, or at least do good things Islamically without having to completely condemn themselves for one aspect of their character. And I think that's kind of valid in a way.
Yeah, we all have weaknesses.
Exactly.
We have things we could improve on and become better Muslims. But whether there's a level where you say, no, you get to a level of arrogance. I'm not saying anyone's arrogant in the show. You just get to a level where you say, I'm not going to change this. This is who I am. This is what I'm going to do. If it's wrong, I don't care. I'm going to keep doing what I am, and this is perfect, and this is fine for me. But the other view is, you could say, I have this weakness, and I'm trying to control myself. I try to change where I can.
I accept to disagree with you.
Yeah, to get closer to perfection.
Fair enough.
But
just to move the convo into like perhaps more so to do with media and you know, contemporary realities. Would you say that you know, because oftentimes they do shows where there's Muslims like us or sister wives or, you know, honey boo boo or whatever seems interesting in society or whatever to like kind of exemplify what's pariah at the moment. Would you say that it's something that perhaps should continue, or to just get more diversity and media like representation?
Can't really see why not. I mean, if it brings up discussion and allows people to hear each other's views and understand each other's views, that's a benefit. I see. There aren't any disadvantages of jumping at me right now. What
I think it will be pretty great. But what I would like to see more than that is actual like Muslim people getting those who are, because we're all individuals regardless of what religion we follow. So, you know, I know a couple of, I mean, Abdul Rahim's one of them, a couple of people who just generally as their own person are very interested in media, very interested about conveying narratives, etc. So those people who just happen to be Muslim, who have more qualitative understanding of the nuances within the community, to perhaps get more involved in mainstream media and things like that, rather than just to outsource it to like,
I agree with that, but then the big question is, how do you make it accessible to those individuals?
I don't know, I'm not in the media. Whoever's in it can think of that.
Maybe Rahim could answer that question.
Yeah, Rahim could answer that. That's really interesting. Another area that I found really, really funny, actually I was cracking up in the show, was when they were doing the did you see when they were playing football outside and then the Niqabi chick was like, okay, all the guys have to go inside and whatnot. See, the reaction, because I was with my friends when I was watching this, the reaction was so different amongst us. Some of my friends were like, no, that's like ultra feminism. If she can't play, then she needs to go inside. Why should everybody else have to go inside, etc., etc. I saw that as them kind of respecting her wishes and whatnot. But what I saw out of my friends was this like ultra, I don't know, to some extent, I guess you could say an inferiority complex to an extent, where it's like, because we're already such a marginalized community, anytime someone actually sticks their neck out and does something that does not conform to the masses, it's like, oh my gosh, why are you bringing more attention to this? You know what I mean? I mean, some of my friends didn't even like the idea that a niqabi Muslim was on TV, even though there's some people in their family that wear niqabs and whatnot. So my whole thing was, why can't the niqabi chick be on TV? You know, why can't she say to the guys, brothers, can you guys please leave for the moment? And they said sure. She didn't drag them out and whatnot. But how do you see, like, what kind of gender relations did you see then? How do you find it?
I can see why you wouldn't want a niqabi in the show, because not 1 in 4 Muslim women wear niqab.
Right.
So when she's there, it's overrepresented in the show.
Right.
It is
overrepresented in the show, but it's still represented though. I mean, she is the 1 in the 4.
Yes.
Right. I mean, do you just want like a perfect statistical representation?
No, I'm saying like ideally that would be the case, but it's not practical.
It's not practical, but also don't you think, because you're emphasizing on the numerical aspect, but when it comes to conversations that are being had about Muslims, sure, niqabis don't make up the most, but it's always a number 1 topic that's brought up.
Yeah, but even with the issue, I don't think she was the one who asked the guys to go in. I think she was the one who was sitting outside watching.
Oh my God, you're so right.
She was the one who decided she doesn't want to get involved. And there's nothing wrong with that. You don't want to take part in activity. It's your right. She sits back and she just watched.
Right.
It was the guys who asked her to join and left.
Right. Oh, actually, you know what? That's like, sorry, I had it backwards. Yeah.
So I can't see anything she did wrong there. I disagree that you can't play sports with personal agenda if it's kicking the footy or whatever. But I don't see what she did wrong there in the sense that she did not want to take part in activity and she took the decision to sit down and watch.
Did you, I mean, this is going to be kind of personal, did you personally feel discomfort having a niqabi person represent an aspect, like represent the Muslim community on a mainstream show like SBS?
No, I was just a little confronted with some of the discussions we're having, like some of with the Sufi individual with the practices and the
I didn't see all of that. What happened?
Essentially, one of I forgot.
The girl with the long hair.
Yeah, she wanted to do a Sufi dhikr.
Okay.
Where remembrance, where they sit across and do a practice that's unique to the Sufis, where they sit down and memorize, do dhikr and remember of God, and then they do some prayers around the house to protect them from the devil. And the niqabi lady was saying that's not Islamic. And Sufism is wrong, and he came 400 years after the Prophet's death or whatever. I think that's more like surface level. Sufism is much deeper philosophy than that. And it did not come 400 years after the Prophet's death. Like, without getting too technical here, Sufism has 3 aspects, where it's Abid, Arif, and Zahid. So you have to worship God, you abstain yourself from the lowly desires of this world, and you try to get closer to God through understanding Him. And those 3 aspects are accepted by every single sect of Islam.
Was it accepted by the house in the show?
Everyone, most individuals joined except the niqabi lady and the one who led the prayers.
Is that one in the trailer you hear someone say, "Shut up, shut up"?
Yes, that's
okay.
So the core aspects of Sufism, like being a worshipper, being someone who abstains from the desires and getting closer to God through knowing Him, are all accepted in all the sects. So when you say Sufism is not accepted, or it's wrong or whatever, it's too shallow. The discussion over there was too shallow, and the practices the lady was doing, that's not the sole aspect of Sufism. So even if you disagree, you could say that practice is not it's not something I accept or whatever. So I think there's some of the discussions here were more scholarly. You needed to have a scholarly opinion on this.
No scholars there.
Because we've had centuries centuries of discussions on these by scholars. And the written profound pages on these, and to have 2 individuals discuss it on the most basic level and then attack each other. I thought was very.
That's pretty interesting. Tom, you work in IGA, you're Anglo-Australian, you watched the show for the first time. Would you say that, because so much of what non-Muslims know of Muslims or know of Islam is directly through the news, and that's, all politicized, so much conflict going on, etc. would you say that this kind of insight would kind of, I guess not humanize Muslims, but kind of make them more, I don't know, accessible to your own sense of humanity and whatnot?
I think so. I think the show really gave each character their own story, and I fell in love with all the characters.
Right.
Like, even though I had disagreements with them, like
right.
I felt they all played their roles really nicely, and I really felt a good connection with the characters.
So, but place yourself in the mind of, hypothetically, in the mind of someone who doesn't have much contact with the Muslim community, someone who is not a Muslim themselves. Like, what contrast would you feel? Or like, how would you be like, oh, okay, they like South Park or whatever, or no, they actually have disagreements, or they're not all this way, they're not all the Niqabi, or they're not all this or whatever.
It's difficult to put yourself in someone else's shoe, but one of the things I think they would have picked up would have been the disunity.
Right.
So much quarrels between eight supposedly Muslims, and so many quarrels and these things to fight over.
Right.
They always found something to fight over. So that's one of the things I think I would have picked up if I wasn't Muslim. And some of the stereotypes were also like,
some were validated and some were deconstructed.
Yes.
Or some were demolished.
Yeah, so I think they would have slightly confusing as well. Like at the end, what is Islam? Like,
well, I think you'd be even more confused coming out of it if you were not part of the community and whatnot. But you just said the disagreement. I would agree, but I would say perhaps not just disagreement, but the diversity within the community. Like, you know, wow, some of them are this and that. What I was going to say was what I would think, because I know I have so many non-Muslim friends, right? There's so many non-Muslims who go to uni with Muslim people, who, you know, work with Muslim people from whatever religious level, persuasion, whatever the case may be, observance, dress code, whatever. So perhaps they'll think, okay, they're just as normal as my friend, or they're just as weird as that person that I used to know. BBC, the UK, did a similar show, and it was a complete disaster. The cast members ended up coming out to the media saying that it was so terrible, and I've seen a bit of that. I've seen a couple of episodes of that, and it was just, to me, it just seemed as if the casting was terrible, as if the production company's narrative that they put in, you know, like to just create some conversation was terrible. So I think this show, the way it was done, the positive atmosphere that carried throughout, the excellent casting, I think is really testimony to SBS itself and how they actually came into this with genuine intentions to really get out, you know, different viewpoints in a respectable manner. So yeah. So
if you were to rate it from 1 to 10, what would you give it?
I would give it a 7. Because it is the first time doing it, so there's something to be said for that, you know, to actually be bold and for SBS to actually say, you know what, this is a topic everyone's talking about, we know it's touchy, but we're going to go out and actually do it, and I definitely have to give pointers for that. The casting was excellent. Perhaps if there were more organized discussion rather than, some of it seemed a bit like Big Brother, like there was conversations about what food and whatnot, but okay, whatever. So yeah, I'll probably give it a 7. I really liked Aisha. I really liked the principal guy. He was really cool, and I liked the Palestinian kid. Everyone else was cool, but they really stuck out to me.
Yeah. I would also give it 7 for very similar reasons. I haven't watched the BBC one, so this was really new to me, and I found it really interesting. In terms of the organized discussions, I reckon this was more natural the way it happened. So I think that was one of the good aspects of it that I really enjoyed. Also, some of the members within the cast seemed to be disengaged in certain discussions. I would have maybe enjoyed if everyone was more engaged in all the discussions and seeing everyone's opinion, because they're all so different, as opposed to, say, 2 individuals dominating all the discussions and having their views being presented in every discussion without us hearing everyone else's view. So that was one of the things perhaps could have been improved on. But overall, I really enjoyed it.
Would you watch it again? If the new show was to come out, the new continuum of it?
I would definitely check it out, yes.
Would you go on it?
Perhaps not.
Yeah, just likewise. I thought this discussion was incredible. As always, talking to Lutful is so insightful, a really knowledgeable guy. I definitely think that hopefully more people are inspired in the community to actually come out and actually get involved in the discussion. You don't have to be a know-it-all, you just have to be someone that's passionate about something and have an opinion, as we all do. And perhaps even for SBS to engage more with, you know, just when it comes to doing surveys or getting more of a, you know, take on, well, how did the Muslim community themselves respond to it? Because that's going to impact how much they actually want to be part of any production that we do, etc.
I found the discussion very insightful. As always, it was nice to speaking to Kawsar. I would perhaps like a few more members in the discussion to see what others thought about it as well. We have a few different views, but I think it's really important as a Muslim for me to share my views, and I hope more Muslims take the opportunity to present their views and what they thought of it as well. It'd be interesting to hear some of it.